All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Good afternoon. So glad that you could join us today. My name is Michael Uden. I'm a principal at the Rabin Group here in Washington, D.C. And really appreciate you taking the time today to join us. This is a really important conversation, and I do hope it will be useful to you. Just a little bit of background, right? I have worked on early childhood education policy for well over 20 years, and National Association, the Education of Young Children is no stranger to me. I've worked with you all for probably well over 2 decades now. So really appreciate all the work that you do every single day to improve the opportunities and chances for our babies. On a personal note, my mom was a preschool teacher for over 40 years. So I can tell you, I know firsthand the importance of the work that you do, the value of the work that you do. I can say that one of my mom's greatest sources of pride, other than of course her 3 children, was the fact that for years, right, years, and I saw it myself, was, you know, people would come up to my mother and say, "Oh, you were my son's preschool teacher. He just graduated from college," right? Or "You were my daughter and she's now a doctor," right? Like that was truly her greatest source of pride. So I really do appreciate the work that you do. It's hard work, it's difficult work, and it is no less difficult due to the crushing debt that sometimes happens with student loan debt. And that's what we're here to talk about today, student loan debt. You know, the work that you do is so important. The value is so, you know, you can't put a number on, but we know that compensation is challenging, and it costs so much to go to college, right? And student debt really is indeed a problem. And so back in 2007, Congress passed what is called the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. And what that was designed to do, it was designed to ensure that we had mechanisms to recruit and retain people, to highly qualified, skilled people to work in public service. And if in fact you worked in public service for 10 years, certain student loan borrowers would actually have their debt forgiven after those 10 years. So the program started in 2007. You know, the first borrowers that become eligible for forgiveness was in 2017. Well, we've seen some very significant challenges with regards to implementation. It's a complicated program, and there are rules in place that really make it difficult for many borrowers. But again, essentially, if you are a public service worker, right? That means if you work in federal government or state government or local government, or you work for a nonprofit organization, certain types of loans and repayment programs will be forgiven after those 10 years. And again, it's been really problematic for a number of years. So this administration came in and said, you know what, we need to kind of reset here. So we are putting in place a waiver of certain rules to make it easier for student loan borrowers to be eligible for public service loan forgiveness. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So, you know, we want to make sure that anybody that is eligible for public service loan forgiveness knows what this waiver is about, knows the steps that they have to take in order to take advantage of this time-limited waiver. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mary, and let's get going.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Michael. NACCE is so appreciative of the Public Service Loan Forgiveness PSLF Coalition and Equal Justice Works for the partnership in providing this webinar, co-hosting with us to help us better understand the program and the temporary waiver right now. I'm Mary Harrell, and I'm Senior Director for Higher Education Accreditation and Program Support at NAEYC, and I'm so pleased to be with all of you today. We hope that you find this webinar, actually, I know you will find this webinar really helpful for those of you who are already participating in the PSLF program, or maybe you have just heard about it and are interested in learning more and seeing if you are eligible to participate in this program. Now is the time. to really pursue the program. Again, as Michael said, there are a lot of changes, temporary changes that are in place to make accessing this program a lot easier for borrowers. So our plan today, I'm gonna share a little bit about just what we've heard from you, our early childhood education community, about your experiences with the PSLF program, and then my colleague is going to be walking through these changes to the PSLF program. And there will be time at the end of this session for you to ask questions as well. We want to hear from you, your questions, your experiences with the program. We hope to get to answer as many questions as we can. And if we don't have time to tackle everything, we will definitely be taking those questions. We're really pleased that the U.S. Department of Education, as well as the Administration for Children and Families, will be hosting a webinar later on in the spring for early childhood educators. So we will share these questions with them so that they can provide some answers at that webinar as well. We know that compensation is the crux of so many challenges that we face as an early childhood education profession. It is at the heart of everything that we're facing. But there are other really important supports that we have or that we can put in place to contribute to advancing our well-prepared, effective, and diverse early childhood education profession. And so federal post-secondary grant and loan programs like PSLF are really critical to this work to improve outcomes for ultimately young children to support our early childhood education workforce pipeline. And we've heard from many of you who have pursued college despite the financial costs that the PSLF program has played a really important role in your decision to carry that cost. Knowing that you will have your federal loans forgiven after 10 years of payment has really encouraged you to pursue early childhood education and to stay in this profession. In the fall, the Department of Education, they sought public comments on the PSLF program. And so NACCE surveyed our members during this time so that we could hear about your experiences, your questions, and use those to inform the comments that we submitted on behalf of our membership. And here's a little bit about what we heard. Many early childhood educators graduate from their degree programs with significant amounts of loans. Over half of you said that you have over $50,000 in loans when you graduate from your program. And another quarter have about $25,000 to $50,000 in student debt loans. That is significant, and particularly as we think about the compensation, or again, the lack of compensation in our field, that is a significant debt to carry. And those of you who have been participating in this program and working toward having your loans forgiven reported receiving a lot of confusing information or incorrect information from the loan servicer during this time. And so some of the themes that arose from that feedback is that many of you reported that your qualifying payments were miscounted, or that you found out you were in the wrong repayment plan, or that your federal loan was ineligible, or that you were incorrectly told you were working for an ineligible employer. And to really kind of rub salt in the wound, that you often found out about this far into the program. So you may have been 5 or 6 years down in terms of trying to make those monthly payments, and you find out this information that really resulted in you having to spend significant time working with the servicer to either get into compliance or to correct the information that they have. And for a lot of you, that meant resetting that clock on making those 120 monthly payments that count toward PSLF. And another challenge we found, particularly with early childhood educators, is it was really hard to get employers to complete that paperwork. You have to have your employer verify your employment every year. And with the turnover in the field, changing employers, that many of you reported it was really challenging to talk to your employers about the PSLF program and to make sure that they completed the verification for the program. And for those of you that reached that finish line, that 10 years and making the 120 months of payments, that many of you found that your loan forgiveness was denied. For those that went through the appeals process, all of those appeals were denied as well. These experiences that you have had really mirror what many in the larger PSLF community have experienced. And so we were really heartened in the fall when the Department of Education took heed of these really frustrating, demoralizing, and in many cases would have been financially harmful situations for early childhood educators, and that they are implementing some significant reforms to the program that we're going to talk about today, as well as some of the temporary policies to provide relief to thousands of individuals who've had unsuccessful experiences in PSLF. So before I turn this over to my colleague, Aoife, I just want to put one caveat in, is that just a reminder about the focus for the webinar today, that we're really going to be focusing on the current PSLF program and the temporary waiver period. There are certainly legislative changes we want to see to the program to both expand the employers that the eligible employers that can be part of this, or reduce the number of monthly payments that individuals have to make before they can be eligible for loan forgiveness. But that is for an advocacy agenda that NACI and the PSLF Coalition, Equal Justice Works, we will all be working on after this webinar. But today we're really going to focus on what the current situation is with PSLF. And so with that, I'm really pleased to hand this over to my colleague, Aoife Delargy, to walk us through the changes to PSLF.
Thanks a million, Mary. Thank you for joining us today. And Michael, thanks a million for that introduction. I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat just in reference to, does this information that I'm going to share today extend beyond early childhood educators? And for this purposes, it's for all public servants, okay? So just keep in mind that if you know someone who's in public service who perhaps doesn't work in early childhood education, is a firefighter, is a social worker, they could be eligible for it and they don't know about it. So please spread the word about this. Equal Justice Works is one of the leading allied members of the PSLF Coalition. So we have been helping out with the coalition by doing these monthly webinars each month. And each month we're partnering with different sectors within the public service community. So we're so happy to partner with the National Association for the Education of Young Children for this webinar. Our next webinar will take place in April, and it's always the second Wednesday of every month, and they are free to all, okay? So before I get started into it, I do ask that if you have put any questions into the chat, please put them into the question and answer box. I know there's a lot of you on today and we want to make sure that we don't miss any questions. So I really encourage you that if you've put it into the chat feature, we're not going to be able to get to it. I need you to put them into the Q&A feature. Thanks so much. Okay, so what are we going to cover today? We are going to talk very briefly at the beginning about the COVID relief that is available for student borrowers right now. I'm going to give a very brief update on the loan servicer situation as it pertains to the PSLF program. And then I'm going to give an overview and, kind of, Michael did a fantastic job of giving that very high level overview of what the original program's purpose was. But we're going to kind of go over that and show that comparison against the temporary waiver that was announced last October. We're then going to walk through some common borrower scenarios in the hopes that it helps you kind of makes it a bit more tangible to understand your own scenario with your loans and whether you're eligible with public service loan forgiveness. And then I'm going to share some resources. They're not exhaustive, but I think these are ones that are worthwhile taking a look at to help you navigate this. And then we're going to try and get as many questions and answers dealt with. As Mary said, we're going to be collecting all the questions. So if we don't get to them, we are going to try and make sure that the Department of Education does have access to those questions so that they will be able to answer them for you at a future date. Okay, so COVID relief for student borrowers. So COVID forbearance, was created under the Trump administration and then extended in the Biden administration to essentially suspend student borrowers' payments towards their federal student loans, and they have been extended multiple times. In December of 2021, we were under the assumption that at the end of January of this year, payments were going to resume. But the Department of Education announced in December of 2021 that they were extending it again to May 1st of this year. So at this point in time, we don't believe there's going to be another extension. So on May 1st, payments are going to resume, interest will start to accrue, and collection activities may restart on defaulted loans. So an update on, an update on the loan servicers. So Fed Loan Servicing has been the primary contractor handling the PSLF program. So anyone who has submitted an employment certification form, or a PSLF form, would have been directed essentially to be serviced by Fed Loan Servicing. They announced in 2021 that they were withdrawing from the federal student loan system, but them and the Department of Education then announced in the fall that they had come to an agreement that they were going to extend FedLoan's contract by another year. Obviously, you know, amidst the fact that the Department of Education had just announced this waiver, that caused a bit of concern that FedLoan would be leaving within less than a year. So they've extended that. And the next loan servicer that will take over administering the PSLF program will be Mahela. So the Department of Education has emphasized that they're going to try and make this process for borrowers as smooth as possible. So keep, you know, an eye out for any additional details that come out from the Department of Education on that transfer to Mahela later at this point. But as I said, as for right now, Fed Loan Servicing is the main servicer dealing with PSLF cases, and if you've never submitted anything towards PSLF, you're probably going to be directed to start working with Fed Loan at this point, and then eventually going on to Mahela. So the original Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, Michael talked about this earlier, but the basics was that it was going to allow borrowers to earn tax-free forgiveness for working in an eligible public service organization after making 120 qualifying payments, which is 10 years worth of payments. So there's no enrollment in this program. It's not a case that you have to, you know, start doing paperwork at the very beginning of your 10 years. Rather, once you've completed that 10 years or you've made those 120 payments, you're putting your hand up to the Department of Education and saying, I am now eligible to earn forgiveness under this program. And it's also worth noting here that, you know, when it was designed, it's emphasizing that it's tax-free forgiveness, unlike other income-driven repayment plans, where you get forgiveness whether you work in, you know, the public sector or the for-profit sector at 20 or 25 years. Under CARES relief, these IDR payments, income-driven repayment relief, that taxable forgiveness, as it were, has been, you know, suspended until 2025. So if you were someone who found out that you weren't eligible for to earn PSLF because you're not in an eligible employment, you may still be eligible to earn forgiveness under one of those IDR programs. And keep in mind that they've suspended that taxable component of it until 2025. So under the original Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, a borrower had to make 120 qualifying payments, and there were very strict requirements as what one payment would, you know, the requirements within that one payment had to have. So it had to have been made after October 1st, 2007. That date is important because that's when PSLF was enacted into law. The payment had to be made towards a federal direct loan. So, you know, keep in mind, if you have state or private loans right now, they are not eligible for public service loan forgiveness. You know, park those loans as we walk through these scenarios today. Okay, this is just for your federal loans. The borrower had to be enrolled in an income-driven repayment plan. So an example of one of those is pay as you earn or revised pay as you earn. Sorry. And the borrower was working full-time or at least 30 hours a week for an eligible qualifying employer. And we're going to unpack what a qualifying employer is later on in the session. And then the payment was considered on time and paid in full. So now this temporary waiver that was announced in October of last year unveiled a plan to temporarily waive a lot of those key requirements that were on the previous slide until October 31st of this year. And essentially the goal is to allow borrowers who were previously disqualified but because of the loan types they had or the repayment plans that they were in, to accumulate credit toward that 120 qualifying payments they need to have their loan balances forgiven. So why has this relief been made available? Michael talked about this earlier, But in essence, you know, the sentiment of the program was honest, but the administration of the program meant that a lot of people were applying for this forgiveness thinking that they were on track. But because of the pretty, you know, rigid requirements, weren't actually getting the relief because they were ineligible or they weren't there. You know, they weren't at that 120 payment point at that point in time. So to date, under the original program, there's only about 16,000 borrowers who've received full loan forgiveness. When the Department of Education announced this waiver in October, they estimated about 500,000 people who had previously consolidated loans could get some additional qualifying payment or credit towards PSLF and bring them closer to that 120. I apologize, I should have updated this slide. We know that to date, about 70,000 borrowers have received about 5 billion in loan relief since October of 2021, and that number should increase and get higher as the months go by. So we're now going to look at the original public service loan forgiveness program and the temporary waiver program side by side so you can see the differences. So under the original PSLF program, borrowers who had federal family education loans or FFEL or Perkin loans were ineligible for forgiveness. But under the temporary waiver, FFEL and Perkins loans are now eligible and count towards the 120 payments that you need in order to earn forgiveness. Payments in non-income driven repayment plans or the standard plans did not count towards the 120 required payments. But under the temporary waiver, previous payments outside of IDR repayments, income driven repayment plans, now count towards the required 120 payments. Previous late payments were not credited towards the 120 payments that you needed, but now under the temporary waiver, previous late payments and also partial payments now count towards the required 120 that you need. And finally, borrowers who consolidated their federal student loans to qualify for PSLF would lose all previous payment credits towards the 120 qualifying payments. In essence, when you consolidated, you kind of restarted the clock. But now under this temporary waiver, payments made prior to consolidation will now be eligible towards the required 120 payments that you need. So now we're going to just break the substance of this down a little bit further, okay? So PSLF eligibility, who is actually eligible? So under the original PSLF program, it was student borrowers and it was Parent Plus borrowers who converted into direct consolidation loans. Under the temporary waiver opportunity, student borrowers are eligible, and the department provided additional information that consolidated Parent Plus loans can potentially qualify for the limited PSLF waiver program under certain conditions. If you consolidate or you previously consolidated a Parent Plus loan, the consolidation loan may be eligible for credit towards PSLF. When the original press release came out from the Department of Education in October of last year, there was some ambiguity around that area, but they gave additional guidance after the fact. So qualifying loans, under the original PSLF program, only federal direct loans and direct consolidation loans were eligible for forgiveness under the PSLF program. But now under the temporary waiver opportunity, all federal loans are going to qualify. But keep in mind, if you have FFEL, Perkin, or other non-federal direct loans, you're going to have to consolidate into a federal direct consolidation loan before you can, in essence, get on track to earn forgiveness. But keep in mind, any of the payments that you made on that FFEL or that Perkin loan, they're not going to get wiped out when you consolidate. Those payments are going to count towards the 120 under this waiver. So qualifying repayment plans. Under the original program, it was income-driven repayment plans, for example, pay-as-you-earn or revised pay-as-you-earn were eligible, and also the standard 10-year fixed plan. It's counterintuitive that that is listed under there, but it's important to kind of flag that, you know, after you graduated and you started working full-time, if you were on that standard 10-year fixed plan and those monthly payments were just too high for you to sustain paying them, you could have moved to an income-driven repayment plan and still have stayed on track to earn public service loan forgiveness. So of course, if you had stayed on the standard 10-year plan for 10 years and you'd forgiven all your loans at that 10-year mark, you wouldn't want forgiveness at the 10 years. But keep in mind, if you move from a standard 10-year fixed plan to an income-driven repayment plan, and you can move in and out of those income-driven repayment plans depending on your family and financial situation, you would still remain on track for public service loan forgiveness. Under the temporary waiver opportunity, all repayment plans beyond the standard 10-year and the income-driven repayment plans qualify to put you on track to earn forgiveness, to get you to that 120 payments that you need under this temporary waiver. So qualifying employments, qualifying employers. These requirements have not changed with the waiver, okay? So nonprofits, 501c3s are eligible qualifying employers. Government, federal, state, local, and tribal are all eligible. If you're a government contractor, you're not technically an employee of that federal agency, and therefore you're not eligible for relief. Peace Corps and AmeriCorps are eligible employment. And then there is another list of not-for-profit organizations that are eligible as qualifying employers. And that list is short, and it's harder to rely on. And I've taken, a quote from it. And Mary, at a certain point, later on, you can allude to this more if we get questions on it. But it does state that early childhood education, including licensed or regulated childcare, Head Start, or state-funded pre-kindergarten organizations that are technically not 501c3s may be eligible as qualifying employers for public service loan forgiveness. So full-time employment. These requirements have not changed with the waiver between the original program and this temporary waiver. If your employer considers you full-time or you're working at least 30 hours a week, you are eligible for public service loan forgiveness. So it's important to make that distinction there. So, if your employer considers you full-time, so an example would be a teacher would be considered full-time, but they don't teach during the summer, they're still eligible for public service loan forgiveness. Also, if you're not working full-time, but you're making up to 30 hours a week with 2 or 3 part-time jobs with qualifying employers, you would be eligible for public service loan forgiveness. So under the original program, it was pretty strict about an on-time and in full payment. And as I showed you on that grid earlier, not only are payments that were not made on time, but also partial payments are now going to be eligible under this waiver opportunity. So the definitions of on time and in full have been relaxed under this temporary waiver until October 31st of this year. So important points on repayments to remember. So for payments to count, your loan status must be in repayment for the purposes of the PSLF program. If you're in deferment, and that's a non-COVID related forbearance or grace period, those payments are not going to count towards the 120 that you need to earn forgiveness unless you're active military. Suspended payments under the COVID forbearance from March 13th, 2020 to May 1st, 2022 will count for everyone that meets other program requirements. So that's about 25 payments towards the 120 that you need to earn forgiveness. So employment status at the time of applying for and receiving forgiveness. So under the original PSLF program, borrowers had to be employed full-time by a qualifying employer at the time of forgiveness to earn relief. So there were situations where someone, worked 10 years, exactly 10 years in public service, and then went to work in the for-profit sector, and at that time applied for public service loan forgiveness. And they weren't eligible because they technically were working for a for-profit organization. So they'd have to return back into qualifying employment, working in the at a 501c3 or for a government agency in order to earn that forgiveness. But under this temporary waiver opportunity, the borrower does not have to be employed full-time by a qualifying employer after or at the time of forgiveness. So these two requirements haven't changed between the original program and the waiver. Payments made on or after October 1st, 2007, that's when this program was enacted into law, will qualify. So if you do have public service work before that date and payments made before that date, unfortunately they can't count towards the 120 payments that you need to earn forgiveness. And that 120 number hasn't changed between the original program and this waiver. So for the purposes of this waiver, the department has clarified how it's going to go about counting the payments. Rather than going back and using loan servicers' actual payment histories for a borrower, the department has confirmed that it's simply going to use a borrower's repayment status as reported to FSA. So you may receive credits for any month after October 2007 that you had qualifying employment and were in a repayment status. Past periods of repayment will now count, regardless of whether you've made a payment on time for the full amount on a qualifying repayment plan. So what do you need to do between now and October 1st of this year? So if you haven't been on studentaid.gov for a while, you really do need to go in there and update your contact information. The Department of Education has stressed this, since they've announced the waiver. They really want to make sure that they have an up-to-date email for you so that they can communicate directly with you about any updates on the waiver, on the PSLF program beyond the waiver. So keep that in mind. Please go in and take a look and make sure that your contact information within your FSA account is correct. If you currently have direct loans and have made 120 payments and have applied for public service loan forgiveness, you should receive automatic forgiveness soon. If you have a direct loan and have made 120 payments and have not applied for public service loan forgiveness, you need to apply as soon as possible. If you have a FEL, Perkin, or a non-federal direct loan, you're going to need to consolidate those into a direct consolidation loan and then apply for public service loan forgiveness. So as soon as you can, if you don't know this already, determine what loans you have. If you discover that you have a FEL, Perkin loan or a non-federal direct loan, as I said on the other slide, you have to consolidate into a direct consolidation loan, and you can do that on studentaid.gov. Equal Justice Works is an organization that's about mobilizing public service leaders in public interest law. So it's pretty abundantly clear to lawyers and law students that keeping thorough records of everything is a part of the job. So we want to stress that every sort of record that you can think of that will help prove that payment is worth keeping. Okay, so any letters that you receive from the Department of Education, any notes that you take when you talk to your loan servicer, or you take down the employee ID number of anyone you speak with. Keep screenshots of your direct payments on your loans. That's worth doing. Keep a copy of all those emails that you receive. Your bank statements that shows that direct deposit towards your student loans. I think banks keep your financial records for about 7 years. If you can download them, just put them in a file on your desktop and just make sure that you have more evidence than less evidence, so that when it comes time for you to put up your hand to earn public service loan forgiveness, you're in the best possible position to support that. You can show, I've made 120 payments and here's all the paperwork I can just show you to support that I have done that. Okay. on the department, on the FSA website or the Department of Education website, you're going to see this very long-winded form that I'm going to refer to as the PSLF form. It's the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Temporary Expanded PSLF TEPSLF Certification Application Form. In essence, there used to be 3 different forms. And over time and through the administration of this program, they've merged all these forms into one document. So that on the back end within the Department of Education, it's easier for them to actually process these, okay? So there's multiple kind of scenarios where you may have to fill out this one PSLF form, but it's going to be pretty intuitive as you go through it, what boxes you should be ticking depending on what stage you're at, and whether you're trying to make sure you're in qualifying employment, or you're trying to get a count of how many 120 of the total of 120 that you need you're at that point, or if you're at that point where you're trying to put your hand up and say, I'm ready to earn forgiveness. You know, like tax season, you should try and do this, you know, update this form and submit it to the Department of Education every year. Do it around tax season, just as a reminder for yourself. Or if you change jobs, you don't, and when I say that, I don't mean if you change title within the same organization. It's rather if you move to a different organization, you should try and make sure that you can show proof that through your entire 10 years and 120 payments that you have a PSLF form that correlates with that qualifying employer that you are working at, that is eligible under this program. So if you think you are within 2 years of making, you know, the 120th payment that you need to earn forgiveness, you should probably fill out that PSLF form now and submit it. There is a chance that when they assess your case, that they may see that there are, you know, previous payments that they didn't count towards 120 that are now eligible, and that might move you closer to earning forgiveness. Less than 2 years. So I would encourage you to do that if you haven't done that now. If you've just started out in public service and you have 8 or more years to reach that 120th payment, we do kind of stress to wait for further instruction from the Department of Education. What we can tell you right now is that the Department of Education went through negotiated rulemaking in the fall of last year, but they failed to reach consensus on the proposed changes to the program. So, you know, our estimations would be that come around the time of the expiration of this waiver, we're going to hear more about what the next iteration of the PSLF program will look like for that next generation of borrowers that are relying on earning this forgiveness for their public service. So our hope is that the next generation have a much easier time of it in earning this forgiveness and you know, submitting this paperwork because of the updates that the Department of Education is trying to undertake to make it a more accessible and transparent process and program for public servants. So after you submit your PSLF form, you're going to receive a letter detailing how many qualifying payments you've made. And they're also going to explain in that letter if they've you know, identified any payments that don't qualify and why. If your current servicer is already Fed Loan, you can track your progress online with My Fed Loan. As I said on the last slide, if you don't file a PSLF form every year, when you're ready to apply for PSLF, you'll have to apply, you know, you'll have to file a PSLF form for every job you've had over the 10 years you are making payments, every employer that you've had. So if at Equal Justice Works, I had multiple titles, but I worked with Equal Justice Works for 5 years. I think one form will suffice for those 5 years. If my HR department can show I started on January 1st of 2015 and I ended, you know, on January 1st of 2020, let's say. So keep that in mind. But best practice, try and have one for every year so that you're putting yourself in the strongest position. So making sure that you know what box you should be ticking at what stage you're in this program. Okay, so this is the first page of the PSLF form. So until you've made your 120th payment and are ready to apply for forgiveness, when you complete PSLF, you're requesting a count on your eligible payments over different periods. So in essence, you're going to tick the box that says, I just want to find out how many qualifying payments I've made, or if my employer is a qualifying employer. But then when you've made your 120th payment and you're ready to apply for forgiveness, you're ticking the box that says, I believe I qualify for forgiveness under PSLF or temporary expanded PSLF. Temporary expanded PSLF, I didn't unpack that earlier, is in essence a program that was kind of like a one-time bucket of money for borrowers who, this is way before the temporary waiver was in existence, who were led to believe that they were on track to earn PSLF, but in fact were not. And the Department of Education were then screening them for this additional relief, TEPSLF, temporary expanded PSLF, and individuals who may be eligible under that. It's going to be a finite number because there's only so much money to support relief under that temporary expanded program. So on page 2 of the PSLF form, your employer is going to fill this out, or your previous employer, if you have to go back retroactively and ask an employer that you previously worked at to fill this out for you. If it's your current employer, you're going to press still employed, or you're going to tick still employed. And there is a box on here for this organization no longer exists. Okay. I will stress that, your employer is going to have to put in their EIN number, and that all connects back to those qualifying employers, the 501c3s, the federal agencies, AmeriCorps, Peace Corps, and other nonprofits that are not considered 501c3s. If you work at an organization that has a for-profit payroll system, outside vendor running payroll and they're for-profit, you need to make sure that that EIN is not what you're using on the form. It's your organization that's the qualifying employer. So keep that in mind. So I just wanted to briefly flag that there is additional information given to us in February from the Department of Education that coming this year, next month, there is going to be an online submission process to request consideration of PSLF or TEPSLF qualifying employment or payment determinations. So you'll be able to submit one or more reconsideration requests through studentaid.gov. This is not going to, provide flexibility on the program criteria, but what they're stating to us through this, submission process or request for consideration, rather, you should wait to hear back on your latest submission or PSLF form under this temporary waiver, and assess at that point, has anything been miscounted, or am I questioning any of the payments that the Department of Education has set don't qualify under this waiver? And at that point in time, then submit a reconsideration request. So don't do this process prior to trying to just get an assessment of how many payments you have right now under this current temporary waiver that was announced in October and expires this October. So I'm now going to walk through some common borrower scenarios. Hopefully this, helps kind of illustrate some issues that you may be having. And then we're going to talk about resources and answer some of your questions. So in this scenario, the borrower says, I have federal direct loans. I'm with Fed Loan, and I think some of my qualifying payments will count towards the waiver. In this scenario, you might receive payments towards the 120 count you need without doing anything. But to be extra cautious, you should submit an updated PSLF form if you want an updated count. If you need to update your qualifying payment count, or if you're disputing ineligible payments, you should do this as soon as you can. And obviously keep in mind that you'll be able to do that with this reconsideration request coming April of 2022 on the student aid website. So I have federal direct loans, but I have never submitted a PSLF form. So you need to do that immediately. You need to submit a PSLF form as soon as you can. And at minimum, you're going to need to submit a PSLF form for every qualifying employer you've had since you started public service or since October 1st, 2007, if you worked beyond 2007 or before that date, excuse me. You can submit the PSLF form to your servicer. So in this scenario, I have a FEL, Perkin, or non-federal direct loan. You need to consolidate these loans into direct consolidation loan. But keep in mind that any of the payments that you made under those original loans prior to consolidation will count towards the 120 that you need. So after you complete the direct consolidation process, you can submit a PSLF form immediately. You could do that all on the same day. And as I said on the previous slide, you're going to have one PSLF form for every qualifying employer you've had in public service. In this scenario, the individual has a mix of FEL, Perkins, and non-federal direct loans and federal direct loans. So in this point in time, we would suggest that you only consolidate the FEL, Perkins, and other non-direct loans. Don't merge them with the current federal direct loans that you have. You know, previously that would kind of restart the clock. So during this temporary waiver point in time, we're suggesting that you don't do that. Let's not muddy the water, as it were, and consolidate just the FEL, Perkins, and non-direct loans. I think I've made more than 120 qualifying payments. Under the waiver, if it's determined you've made more than 120 qualifying payments on an existing direct loan, you're going to receive an automatic refund for the amounts paid over 120 required. If you're an individual who's already received loan forgiveness, you're not going to be eligible for a refund. But under this waiver, if it's determined, you know, you've made 130 qualifying payments, 10 of those payments are going to be given back to you because you've gone over what is needed for the program. And we have heard of scenarios where people have started to see those refunds come, and they're coming as individual checks of that, like essentially that payment that you made. They're checks from the Department of Treasury. They may have a note in them that says, you know, a refund for PSLF, they may not, but you're going to receive them separately in the mail, okay? So just keep that in mind. Okay, so I'm just going to very quickly show you some resources that I think are helpful, and we will share the slide deck with everyone tomorrow. You know, this is not exhaustive. These are just ones that we think are pretty helpful as you go through this process. So obviously, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Coalition, they, you know, our allied members across public service professions are keeping this website up to date. All of our webinars are on that website. They're free second Wednesday of every month. Resources depending on your profession will be up there. If you know a public servant who has never heard of this before, let them know about this website. Make sure that they get up-to-date information about how they might be able to earn this forgiveness. If you work in an organization that wants to become an allied member of the PSLF Coalition, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat later on. But you know, we have over 90 allied members as part of the coalition, and we're always trying to expand that to make sure that we have you know, a fairly inclusive group of public service professions across the country. So the PSLF help tool on FSA. This is a helpful tool, but it has limitations, okay? It's essentially helping you auto-populate the PSLF form. You know, it hasn't been updated to account for the COVID forbearance or this temporary waiver. Sometimes people have situations where when they put in their employer identification number, it won't understand that number, or it's not within that anthology list that the Department of Education holds. Don't worry about that as much. You can fill it out as far as you need to and then populate the other sections. So again, it is helpful, but it does have limitations. So some other things that are, helpful, and I've talked about today, and these are direct links to them: the original PSLF program, the PSLF form, and that direct consolidation loan application that live on studentaid.gov. Student Borrower Protection Center is one of our allied members, and they're doing amazing work on the advocacy of the PSLF program. They are collecting borrower issues and complaints regarding the temporary waiver, and they're directly sharing them with the Department of Education. So they have a form on their website where you can fill it out and submit that complaint, and that will go directly to the Department of Education from SPPC. They've also created very helpful video guides for this process that are shorter, bite-sized videos to help you navigate this than rewatching 40 minutes of me chatting to you. Also, they've put together a list of state-based resources for borrowers where you can file a complaint before attempting to escalate to the Department of Education's ombudsman. Generally speaking, if you're having an issue with your loan servicer, you should try and make a complaint to them. If you don't get anywhere, go to the state level. If that doesn't happen, if nothing happens at that point, it'd be worth considering using that reconsideration request come April of this year. And then if nothing comes of that, you could escalate to the Department of Education's ombudsman. So this is the information for the Department of Education's ombudsman's office. There is a link here to submit a complaint, but you can also do it over the phone with them. And here I've listed kind of the press release on the waiver itself, the extension of loan, suspension of payments, COVID forbearance until May of this year, and that press release on Mohela taking over from Fed Loan. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over for questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can give you all full attention. All right, my colleague Brooke Meckler is going to help us get through these questions. Thank you, Brooke, for helping us.
No problem. I have been going through, a lot of questions came in, and I did just see some themes. So instead of asking specific questions, I'm going to get a general sense of your answers for some of the themes that came through. The first is, can you reiterate what the rules are right now when it comes to the COVID suspension of payments and how those count towards PSLF?
Yeah, so under COVID forbearance, as of right now, if you have been opting into that suspension of payments, you're still, those zero payments you've been making will still count towards the 120 that you need ultimately to earn forgiveness.
Thank you. And another sort of series of questions came in about consolidation. Would you mind just reviewing what happens if a borrower consolidates right now, how that operates under the temporary waiver as opposed to what would have happened not under the waiver?
Right. Okay. So basically, at a high level, you want to understand that what the Department of Education is trying to do right now is to get everyone into the same category. So they want to have everyone in the federal direct or federal direct consolidation loan category. So prior to this waiver, FEL, Perkin, and non-federal direct loans didn't count towards the PSLF program. So if you had made payments on those loans, they weren't going to count towards that 120 that you needed. And prior to the waiver, if you made that direct consolidation of one of those loans, it wiped out any of the payments that you made on those loans. And if you had merged or consolidated a Perkin loan with a federal direct loan into a direct consolidation loan, it wiped everything out from those two loans. and restarted the clock, and that's, you know, really unfair. So under the temporary waiver, what they're saying is any payments you've made on a FEL, Perkin, or non-federal direct loan is going to count towards that 120 that you need to earn forgiveness. But before we can even count them, we need you to consolidate into a direct consolidation loan so that everyone's moving into the same category, so that going on into the future, everyone's all in the same, on the same path, as it were, to earn relief. So if you have a FEL loan, oh yeah, Mike, go ahead.
No, I didn't mean to cut you off. Continue what you were saying. I'm sorry.
So if you have a FEL loan or a Perkin loan right now, all those counts, all those payments that you've made, they are going to count, but you just have to fulfill the step under the waiver in order for them to put them towards the 120 that you need.
The only thing I was going to add, that was my point exactly, was right. If you have these non-direct loans, you do need to consolidate them into a direct consolidated loan before the expiration of the waiver. That's the key. Is this period is this is a waiver for a limited period of time. So if the waiver expires and Congress or doesn't take any other further action, we go back to the old rules, and all of those old payments won't count. So you have to do it before the waiver expires.
Can you also readdress the difference between part-time work and full-time work? I think a lot of listeners right now might have some part-time work at daycares and other early childhood education sort of career and employment situations. So what part-time is as opposed to full-time for under the waiver and under public service loan forgiveness.
Okay, so the important number that you have to keep in mind is 30 hours, okay? If your employer considers you full-time, and that is 35 or 40 hours, you're eligible, okay? But if it was under 30 hours, it wouldn't, and they consider that full-time, that's that gray area, okay? It has to be 30 hours or more. For part-time, so if you worked at 2 daycares, 15 hours and 15 hours, and it added up to a total of 30, you're fine, you would be eligible for it. But it's just keeping in mind that if your total weekly hours is less than 30, that's where you have an issue.
Just to clarify, both of those part-time employers have to be qualifying employers.
Yes, so they have to be a 501c3, a government, state, federal, tribal, a Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, or one of those other not-for-profits that technically aren't a 501c3, but are considered a not-for-profit. They do work that Congress thinks is important.
Thanks, and I know we only have 1 minute left, and I apologize that we couldn't get to all these questions, but to leave some time to close out, I think I'll end it there with the questions.
Perfect, thank you so much, Brooke. So please keep in mind, we know you've put in a lot of questions there. We're going to collect them all, and we're going to give them over to Mary, and Mary's going to make sure that they are given to the Department of Education so that we can answer them for you. Mary, Michael, do you want to say anything?
No, just, yes, 30 seconds, right? And that is, you do need to take action. This is an incredible opportunity to redress some of the very poor implementation, as well as some of the rigid rules. So it is for a limited period of time. Check out our website, pslfcoalition.org, right? There is a tab for the waiver. There is a bunch of resources there. We stand ready to support you in any way we can.
I just want to say thank you to Aoife and Michael so much for the enormous resources you provided in this webinar. And I found it very clarifying, and I hope everyone else did too, just in terms of understanding what this temporary waiver is. And just to echo Aoife and Michael's message that it is for a temporary period. So we really encourage you to take action now. And Aoife listed a number of great resources, and we will be sharing the questions. So we are looking forward to kind of a part 2 later this spring with the U.S. Department of Education and ACF for another webinar for early childhood educators. So again, thank you so much, Aoife and Michael, for this webinar.
No problem. Best of luck, everyone. I hope it was helpful.
Bye.